If we look at the fundamentals, what do we as human beings need to do to stay alive? We need to eat, we need to breathe, we need to sleep, and we need to drink. Well, we've quantified everything but hydration.
This is Stefan van der Flu, the founder of FLOWBIO, the company building real-time hydration analysis for the everyday athlete. Why is hydration the missing piece in most people's performance?
We today treat electrolytes like ibuprofen. Take one and all your problems will go away. That's simply not the case. I remember sitting down with a venture capitalist and being like, why do I need a 300-pound sensor to tell me when I need to drink this? And I was like, the exact reason you just said what you said, that's why you need a sensor. Dehydration is not only lack of fluid. Dehydration is actually significantly more complex. It's the balance of water to salt. Most people think when I hit the wall, it's because of a lack of macronutrients, a lack of carbohydrates. And the reason for that is all the food just sat in their gut because there wasn't enough water and salt to transport that into the muscles.
You mentioned about building companies as being a kind of art form. What do you mean by that?
To me, a company is really the truest expression of oneself. And it's not just the product, the culture, it's the way that you handle partners, it's the environment that you create. That to me is how I express myself.
So we've got Aura and Whoop for tracking performance and sleep, and we've got MyFitnessPal for food. God knows how many other wearable devices and apps that we can track all of these other things. Why haven't we tackled hydration?
It's a good question. I think it's so.
All right, Stefan, thanks very much for coming down and welcome to Health Stack. So FlowBio is a sweat detection sensor and a companion app. Why is hydration the missing piece in most people's performance?
It's a very good question. Obviously, now that I ask you the question I'm going to ask next, you'll probably be biased because you came down to the lab and you saw it for yourself. But when, maybe I'll ask the audience quickly, when you think of dehydration, being very honest with yourself, what do you think of? Mostly the answer that all of us typically had, I certainly had this before I got into this space, is dehydration is a lack of that. If I'm dehydrated, I need more of this. So like, why is that a problem? Surely I just, why do I need, I remember sitting down with a venture capitalist and being like, why do I need a 300-pound sensor to tell me when I need to drink this? And I was like, the exact reason you just said what you said, that's why I need a sensor. Because dehydration is not only lack of fluid, dehydration is actually significantly more complex. It's the balance of water to salt. So for us, looking at all the things we're optimizing in our daily life, especially I'd say folks who are like really type A, very optimizing mentality, really kind of high performance, you're almost treating yourself as a professional athlete. And having now worked with a lot of professional athletes, I would say a lot of amateurs, a lot of non-professional athletes are more serious in their daily discipline than pros. And the reason for that is pros have a whole system behind them. They basically get told what to do and they just follow the action plan. Whereas all of us, mere mortals, we have to come up with it ourselves. So what you're seeing is, sleep has been quantified for a decade plus, same with steps and activity. Heart rate straps allowed us to understand our effort, so you're able to train more specifically. If you go to any commercial gym nowadays, you'll typically be able to buy a heart rate strap. If you take part in classes, they gamify the whole experience. So all of these things are just in our normal vocabulary. But if we're sleeping well, if we're training well, and we're not thinking about our hydration, all of that is somewhat for nothing because your body isn't being given what it requires to properly recover and to properly move around the nutrition that you're providing yourself. So for example, we had athletes who came to us who they trained their gut to digest 120 grams per hour, which is kind of on the top end of some athletes are doing more, but like
of carbohydrates.
So if you're able to digest 120 grams of carbs per hour, you can put out some really solid performance for some proper length of time. Their issue was they were still hitting a wall. And most people think when I hit the wall, it's because of a lack of macronutrients. It's because of a lack of carbohydrates. And the reason for that is all the food was just sat in their gut because there wasn't enough water and salt to transport that into the muscles. So I think, myself getting into this space, came in as an amateur athlete and kind of got really serious in my sports. And it was when I tried to go pro as a triathlete that I learned for the first time that dehydration has nothing to do with the lack of water, but it's the balance of water to salt. And it was my coach at the time who, when we were looking at a whole bunch of reasons why my body just wasn't able to absorb the training volume, and he simply asked me the question like, okay, we've looked at your carbs, we looked at your sleep, what are you drinking? I was like, I'm not drinking alcohol. So seems like a very loaded question. Like, what am I supposed to be drinking? And he's like, well, what's in your bottle? I'm like, water. He's like, but where's the salt? And then I, as kind of this product person, started to delve deep into, okay, how do I know how much salt I need? How do I understand what my body needs from a day-to-day basis? Because if you're training with structure, right? If you're training with intention, what we call like this committed athlete lifestyle, right? So you're someone who's following a training plan, be it on Runna or on Training Peaks or wherever. Your training is intentionally different day to day because you're trying to force a physiological adaptation. So by nature, you need to change up the training. So on an easy day versus a hard day, I was like, well, I'm taking different carbohydrates. Surely my water and salt should be different. How do I figure that out? Water, it's a bit easier. You just get on and off a bathroom scale. It's very arduous, but you can do it. Salt is complete guesswork. You have to go to a lab, and the issue with the lab is it's a simulated environment. So you're not actually getting the data in like the natural habitat in which the data is created, i.e. out in the field, but it's the best that you could do. But still, you had to book a day out of work. You had to pay a practitioner around 200, 300 pounds for a sweat test. And again, that would be model data, or that would be synthetic data. You couldn't use that data across all your sessions, but that was the best we had. So yeah, it was around 6 years ago that I decided, kind of, my founder battery had recharged for my previous business. And I was like, okay, this idea is still stuck in the back of my head. It's gotta be solved. And we call it now, it's the last pillar of performance that has really yet to be tapped from the fundamentals, right? So if we look at the fundamentals, what do we as human beings need to do to stay alive? We need to eat, we need to breathe, we need to sleep, and we need to drink. That's kind of the basics. If you strip all the eccentricities away, that's the basics. Well, we've quantified everything but hydration. And yeah, now it was the last pillar it was the last domino to fall, so to speak.
Why is that? Why have we? So we've got, Aura and Whoop for tracking performance and sleep, and we've got MyFitnessPal for food. God knows how many other wearable devices and apps that we can track all of these other things. Why haven't we tackled hydration?
It's a good question. I think it's so like we've wondered this too. I mean, in part, there's the kind of low-hanging fruit opportunities, right? I think hydration is not one of the low-hanging fruit opportunities. It took us 5 years to develop the tech, very complex development. I mean, companies like PepsiCo sunk tens of millions into this and weren't able to do it. So I think Samsung bought a company for, I think it was 50 million plus that tried to do this and failed. It's a very difficult thing to do. I think that's one. Two, there's also a psychological element, right? I think customers, we didn't know to know. I mean, it's only in the last 2-3 years that like the electrolyte industry has become a thing. Protein, carbohydrates, that was a thing decades ago. But really, electrolytes is kind of only now really coming into play. Part of that could be climate change, right? Things are getting warmer. We are sweating a lot more. Even just like sat outside eating your lunch, you're going to be sweating way more than you were 10 years ago. So I think there's a psychological aspect of the education piece makes it kind of more demanding, or there's more demand as a result of us having more understanding of our body. But yeah, I think from a technical standpoint, so many of the other parameters were simpler to solve. I mean, so one of our investors founded Oura. He'll be very honest. If you want good sleep data, you still have to go to a lab. Like I think a lot of the information, that's why I don't wear any, like ironically, as a founder of a biosensor company, I got rid of my biosensors. And the reason for that is because my main focus in life is performance. So if the data that I'm given isn't good, I don't bother. So still my favorite wearables today are my heart rate strap, because it's still the most accurate means by understanding my training load. So I think there's still this kind of challenge in the world where wearables as a whole are still giving a lot of noisy data, right? It's optical sensors, by virtue of being their form factor, are not as accurate as ECG or EKG based devices. So I mean, that device is perfectly fine right now, but the second you go out for a walk, the second you go run, the second you're above kind of zone 2, that data is just trash. And then all of the remaining data that comes from that, right, your stress, all of that is trash because it's coming from the source of optical. So I still think from a parameter standpoint, like sleep and whatnot, we can do and should do much better. And that's what I'm quite excited about, because I do think the next generation of wearables is going to be more science-led wearables, because I think customers know to ask the right questions now. We've been given the basics, and we've been able to understand through the basics what questions to ask. And now we're being a lot more critical about the companies who produce these products to answer those questions with the right answer. And I think that's what I think is really exciting, is potentially almost doing away with this concept of one size fits all, or one ring or one form factor to rule them all, and actually moving more into a peripheral approach where you have neatly integrated into maybe your textiles, into your mattress, into your toilet, because that's where you actually get significantly better data. There's always this balance that we have to play in life, the trade-off of convenience versus accuracy, precision versus it's just easy to get. And I do think that a lot more people are shifting into this kind of performance lifestyle where they're actually doing away with the devices that aren't accurate, and they're demanding more kind of lab-esque devices.
There's definitely a shift, I think, and over-optimization of bad data is something that we're seeing a lot of, and people getting tired of it and ditching the wearables. And I want to dive in a bit more into the product and also a bit more into your journey. But before we do that, just to quantify what you've said to people that might be listening, because I know you have a bunch of data from your pro athletes that have used the product. Like, how big of a performance increase is it they're seeing from, let's just kind of take two categories of people, and maybe you've got some examples of each. The average person who takes an electrolyte sachet in the morning and perhaps before and after exercise, versus the person that's using the FLOWBIO wearable and is tracking their sodium levels and their sweat levels at a real-time basis. Like, how much of a performance increase would the latter see?
Yeah, it's a good question. So to answer it very quickly, and then I'll go into the details to why, it's not, you can't just give a straight percentage, because we're all uniquely different. So, for example, there's a reason why the sub 2-hour marathon was broken with probably with more than 5% of body mass lost, because that person was genetically maybe trained or able to sustain still pretty hard exercise with the traditional 2% of body mass in dehydration, where you start to see performance decline. So it still varies person to person. So I always like to answer things in stories. So one athlete of ours who came to us an amateur, because actually the majority of our customers are amateurs. It's a very common mistake to think that like FLOWBIO is just for the elite. Our typical customer is the 50-year-old mammal, the middle-aged man in Lycra. That is our customer. So the one story is actually from someone like this who is an ultra marathon runner. So their friends asked him to enter into a 70.3 Ironman and do the run leg. So it was a relay, the three of them. And being an ultra runner, he's like, 21K, can do that in my sleep. He ended up in a coma because of dehydration. And he came to us a couple months later when he was recovering, because he wanted to train for an ultra, and he really didn't want to have this again, because the last thing you want to do in an ultra where you're out in the middle of nowhere is collapse. So he started working with us. He finished I think it was a 6-day ultra marathon in the top 5%. And a lot of that he put down to his proper understanding now of dehydration. And I think a lot of us, we treat, and I was trying to think about this actually the other day, we today treat electrolytes like ibuprofen. Take one and all your problems will go away. That's simply not the case. And you saw this for yourself in the lab, where our sodium concentration, it changes day to day. It changes as a function of energy expenditure, so intensity of the exercise, right? So on an easy day, I lose less than on a hard day. But it also changes as a result of environmental conditions, right? So on a day like today, or even at 7 a.m. today versus at 11 a.m. today, same day, different time, my concentration will differ because the environmental conditions have changed quite drastically. All of that results in you just basically guessing unless you have data. And the guesswork can typically extrapolate or it can get worse quite quickly. And we had a science and sport ultra runner in the lab when they wanted to activate their newest electrolyte product, which I think is like the Hydro Plus. And they basically had her on a treadmill. I think it was for an hour and a half. And we filmed her. We showed shots of the sensor. We showed shots of her. And then afterwards, she was asked to drink. And she asked us, okay, how much should I drink? And these are typically the opportunities where we're like, drink what you normally would drink, and then we'll tell you how much you should drink. So she went for the sachets and she grabbed one sachet, as you normally would do, right? It's on the back of the packaging. Take one after exercise. Then she turned to us and said, okay, how much do I actually need? She needed 7 sachets based on her sodium concentration and her sweat rate for that run. And then I turned to the head of marketing for SIS and I was like, when you guys were developing this form factor, how long was this box intended to last an individual customer? And they were like, a month, and it's 30 sachets. And I was like, well, she just used 7 of 30 in a session. So that's really, I think, the aha moment for a lot of people, especially if you're in the electrolyte industry. The lack of data actually results in, one, you as a customer completely getting it wrong, because guesswork just leads to bad decisions. And two, from a brand's perspective, you're leaving revenue on the table. In her case, she underconsumed by 5x, right? She should have needed another 5 sachets. She took 1. And I think this is really the aha moment that we're starting to see, is people's performances increase because of science. And that's why I love about FlowBio, especially in the noisy world that we live in today, where a lot of marketing is trying to sell us problems we don't have. Hydration is just science. If you are dehydrated, either through a lack of water, lack of salt, or a surplus of water and salt, your body will tell you, and it will tell you typically by slowing you down. Because our bodies were not designed to finish marathon sub 2 hours to go do the Tour de France. Our body's designed to stay alive. We've pushed and made our bodies adapt to finishing a tour and running a sub 2. But in order to sustain that adaptation, we need to give it what it requires. And if we don't do that, it will push back. It will try and survive. And by doing that, it slows us down.
I was shocked. So I came down to the lab and I think I did a 45-minute cycle on the Zwift bike, and I lost almost a litre of fluid and 1,000 milligrams of sodium. And to put that into context, this is a litre and a half, I think.
Yeah.
So, you know, we were kind of trying to think about how much I would lose on a typical bike ride. And you've got those things in your office.
Yeah, the different scales.
Yeah, and it was like, and we had like this kind of high.
A 3-liter bottle, yeah.
Which I looked at, and you just don't think about that, right? You until you see it visually like that, it's really hard to understand. So you talked there about a lot of guesswork and a lot of fluctuations in how people's sodium levels and dehydration might change throughout the day, given certain factors. Just to kind of really press that point and make it obvious, off of the top of your head, can you list all of the factors that might impact somebody's sweat levels at a certain time on a certain day?
Yeah, so the main ones, and this is also part of the core tech of what makes us so accurate, and also what allows us to integrate into existing wearables, is sweat rate is predominantly determined by your energy expenditure, so the amount of heat that you're producing, right? So if I'm running very easy at like 12, 13 kilometers, well, 13 kilometers per hour is not easy. If I'm running at like 9 to 10 kilometers per hour, versus I'm running kind of 14 to 16 kilometers per hour, my body is creating significant different amounts of heat because the muscles are having to work significantly harder. So that's one of the biggest determinants of your sweat rate, right? So you can actually see this, and we see this in the data, where when someone's doing an interval-based session where they have 3 minutes on followed by 60 seconds rest, and you see the heart rate go up and then come down, sweat rate does the exact same. So your sweat rate is very much based on the amount of heat you're producing, and therefore also the temperature in which you're producing that heat, right? If I'm running super easy in a 40-degree environmental chamber, the amount of sweat that my body needs to produce to thermoregulate is way higher than me running easy at 5 degrees Celsius. Because at 5 degrees Celsius, I barely need to sweat. And a lot of us, the way that kind of, I love thinking about it now, now being in the company, the way I think about performance now, it's about heat, right? So if I'm able to minimize the heat I produce, I'm able to push my performance much higher, because essentially at the end of the day, our body wants to maintain a certain core body temperature in which it's able to perform. So if I'm able to manipulate my heat production through layers, through wind, through eating ice, reducing your core body temperature, I'm able to push the ceiling of my performance. And we all think that we sweat just as a function of just like, that's what we do as humans. The only reason we sweat is to thermoregulate. So our bodies don't sweat voluntarily. They sweat as a result of a reaction to temperature change and as a reaction to core body temperature change. So if we're able to manipulate the way by which our core body moves, we're able to therefore manipulate our sweat rate. And you see this in really trained athletes, their sweat rate will go up because their body's really heat acclimated. So they're able to maintain their core body temperature significantly better than untrained athletes who maybe aren't doing heat training or exposed to heat environments.
And then I guess you've got, that's the sort of kind of like the measurable ones, right? Then you've got, I guess, the weather.
You got weather, you got layers. So you got sun exposure, like whether it's a cloudy day, a non-cloudy day, you have wind. So whether you're being cooled through wind, or if it's like a wind dead day, all of these things will impact the amount of heat that your body's therefore producing.
And then in terms of the sort of the sodium loss, is that impacted by things like residual salt in your system, what you had for dinner last night, what you had for breakfast, for kind of how much fluid you'd had the day before?
That's a really good question. So no. So in order for the salts to be affected by diet, you would need to be severely over-consuming sodium for months before that starts to show up. So say you had particularly salty chips the night before, no, it won't impact your sweat sodium. If your sweat sodium is high, that's because your body's probably working a lot, or genetically you maybe have a high sweat sodium. So again, sweat sodium is very random. It's something which, unless you're physically measuring it, you just cannot model it because it's genetically determined. And it's not like good or bad. It's a bit annoying if you have a higher sweat sodium concentration, because that means you need to take significantly more salt in. And what we typically see, right, the FLOWBIO system, the people who come to us, it's already a biased population. It's people who have kind of already self-diagnosed themselves to have high sweat rates or saltiness because they're having the symptoms of headaches, cramping, etc. People who don't cramp, people who don't get headaches, I can promise you they probably have a low sweat rate and a low sweat sodium. Therefore, the guesswork that they're doing is just good enough to pass by for them not to notice that they're actually just guessing, but potentially getting it better, because their body just doesn't require as much. But yeah, your sweat sodium is very much genetically determined. That being said, it still varies. So if I'm doing a hard session, so think of it like a tap. If I'm opening the tap full throttle, the water that gets expelled is at significantly higher velocity, which will pull with it more salt because the sweat gland is not able to reabsorb that salt. Whereas if you kind of slightly taper the tap, the drip is less, therefore the sodium concentration is too, because your sweat glands are actually able to reabsorb it. So yeah.
So there's a few things that I read in our research about you as a founder, which I thought was super interesting. You mentioned about building companies as being a kind of art form.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. Maybe it's also like as a reaction. So in my family, my brother's the creative because he's physically doing art. But I would always kind of, yeah, I always protested to that. I'm like, well, Chantal's creative, I'm creative. We just express it differently. I think to me, companies, and again, I think there's a lot of cash-oriented individuals in the world, right? So they would probably see this like as a massive hippie version, right? A company's an asset which is supposed to make money, and that's all it is. But really, and I think the founders in the room, they will empathize with this. A company is really the truest expression of oneself, in my opinion. And it's not just the product, right? The product is a very small part of a company. It's the culture, it's the way that you handle partners, it's the environment that you create. That to me is how I express myself. So, for me, I remember working at a company, I won't name names because I'm not here to shame, but I remember working at a very big company now in Europe. At the time we were quite small. And the founder was like, I don't give a shit about culture. Culture happens. It's okay. And I'm like, mate, with that attitude, culture will absolutely happen to you, and it will happen to you in the negative, because culture is something that you need to constantly be working. You need to care about it if you want to create a really healthy environment. I mean, FLOWBIO, being a hardware company, like we've had our fair share of near-death experiences, and no one has ever quit the company. We've missed salaries, right, where we weren't able to make payroll, and people don't leave. And I think a large part, and I've had some members of the team come up to me, and they were like, it's the culture. It's the reason I'm here is because of the environment that we've created together. And that to me is the art form. It's like, to me, I'm a very caring individual. I'm a long-term individual. I'm not in it for capital. Obviously, we'll make capital. The way that I've always been taught to think about capital is money follows something, right? Money is not the reason for something, it's the result of something. And if you focus on creating something incredibly valuable and incredibly good, the world obviously wants that, and money will follow as a result of the demand in that. So we've just created this environment in which a lot of those I'd say beliefs are expressed. And yeah, it's kind of, it's like an artist on a canvas. They're trying to tell you something. With FlowBio, it's very much the same thing. Like, to me, I did a lot of work with a CEO coach before, where it was like, what are you doing? Like, what's your purpose? And I was never asked that question. And I realized my true purpose isn't creating companies. Like, I create companies as a result of trying to express what I think the world should try and embody, which is long-term, people-first policies. So for me, FlowBio is an example. It's called like this whole concept of conscious capitalism, right? I think majority of us, not all of us, majority of us can agree that capitalism is fucked up right now. It is not a good place. And it's the only economic incentive system that's worked, but we've completely let it. So the founder of capitalism, John Adams, basically had kind of two strands of capitalism. And one strand is basically power is corrupted and takes advantage. And that's what we found ourselves in. And with FlowBio and all of my other companies, I've always tried to represent the other strand of capitalism, which is more the conscious strand, where if you have this long-term play, and if you're putting people first, if you're putting planet first, if you're putting the right things first, you actually increase your share price significantly higher over time. So it's through FlowBio and through all the things that I do, I'm trying to express my opinions to the world that there's a better way, or there's a different way in which we could do things.
How does that manifest, like in the day-to-day world at FlowBio? So what are some examples around how you work as a business?
Okay, I mean, a really good example, right? So we had a team member get diagnosed with cancer 6-7 months ago, right? So in most environments, and I even had this like advised to me from a HR perspective, 3 months is the statutory sick period, whatever. I'm like, fuck off. This guy has cancer. He's realistically not going to return to work for at least a year. We were also not in a great position financially, but I was like, we will figure it out. He needs to focus on recovery. The last thing he needs to have is stress as a result of financial distress, because that's just going to absolutely screw up his recovery process. So I basically had a flat down line of like, we keep paying his salary, full salary. I know he's not productive for the company, but eventually he will come back and he needs to focus on recovery, and that's the most important thing. So it's the human aspect. And I think there's a lot of different examples where, we've had, so we don't have a strict holiday policy at FlowBio, right? We don't have a set amount of days, because what I have found in my own experiences as an employee is a lot of companies treat the employee-employer relationship as it's a really toxic power struggle, basically. Where a lot of employers are essentially like, well, I'm paying you money, so I expect you, from 9 to 5 to do exactly what I need. And okay, great, you're going to get that attitude. You're going to get someone who clocks in at 9, clocks out at 5. And whether they're productive between those hours, it's very difficult to tell, right? You'll see that in performance reviews. But it's a leading with the cane or leading with the stick approach. Whereas I think what is significantly better is if you show goodwill to people, right? I think it's this mentality, and it's always this mentality that people can choose to lead through love or to lead through fear. Both are incredibly good motivational systems, but they lead to fundamentally different environments. And I don't know about you, but I would much rather work and live in an environment that's love-driven than fear-driven. And that, at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to. FlowBio and all the things that I'm involved with, we always try to create environments where it's driven through love rather than through fear, because inherently those are just the more enjoyable places to work. And the proof is in the pudding, right? We're a very small company in some like shitty office in Bermondsey, and we've built the world's most sophisticated hydration intelligence technology. We've beat the likes of PepsiCo. We've beat the likes of Epicor. There have been companies who've gone bankrupt, raised tens and tens of millions, who weren't able to do it. Coca-Cola have tried to do it, right? Samsung tried to do it. And some little tiny shop of 10 people in Bermondsey did it, right? I don't think that's because of the money that we raised. I think that's because of the environment we created in which people really wanted to push themselves. At the end of the day, that's how we demonstrate things.
I can agree more. I think that there's, that kind of leading with fear creates resentment ultimately, right? Like, and people might well deliver the short-term outcomes that you need them to deliver, but they're not tied into that. They don't believe in things in the same way as the founder.
Correct. And I think the unfortunate thing is, and you hit the nail on its head, it will deliver in the short term. And for the most part, we live in a very short-term world, right? Our attention spans are horrible. I mean, now through the result of like TikTok and Reels and everything, like holding someone's attention for even 5 minutes is challenging. And a lot of incentive systems, right? Look at the stock market, quarterly performance. It really doesn't matter. The Shell CEO isn't being rewarded for 20 years time performance. They're being rewarded for the next quarter. So they're going to rinse the shit out of any resources available to them rather than thinking in 20 years time, this planet still needs to exist. And I think that's a choice, right? What I find so fascinating, maybe, in another life I should have studied anthropology, but what I find so fascinating is the choices we as humans decide to make. And a lot of those choices, if you think of the human race as a species, we're actually the stupidest species alive. We are racing towards our own extinction. And I think that's what I'm so fascinated by, is there are so many people in this world who don't want that for good reason. And I think, we used to be in a minority, but I do think actually we're now starting to muster this majority position. And that to me, again, I made a choice to go into private industry. I made a choice to go into startups. It's because I think, unfortunately, the world still listens to successful people. And we still, unfortunately, extrapolate success to financial success, right? Whether I'm a successful poet or successful philosopher, people are going to listen to me way less than to Bill Gates or Elon Musk. That's just the hard truth. So you need to be a Bill Gates or Elon Musk to get the world to change. The unfortunate thing is the billionaires we also now have, I mean, who knows what like school of philosophy they went to, but I think we're also in a dangerous position now where the people of influence actually do have very, very bad opinions of where the world should be. So that's the reason why I do what I do. It's to hopefully implement significantly more societal change. And the channel, the medium through that is through companies, which over time become their own successes, and over time then allow us to build our own platforms and our own podiums on which to hopefully get the world to realize actually you can succeed by doing good.
It's a great way to run a business. And I want to move on to sort of product and some of the choices that you've made around that. But one of the lines that I read when I was doing some background research about you was that you believe, or that you kind of hold the belief that, I think it was, we're all winging it. We're all human, and we're all trying our best, I think, with the three lines. And I think it's true of I've met, through my kind of background in recruitment, I've met hundreds of founders, and what I've learned from all of them is that we are all winging it to some extent.
We are. And I think the sooner we admit that to each other, the sooner we can actually have real conversations.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that I really enjoyed from my time at Facebook was actually just like being exposed to the value, be your authentic self, bring your authentic self to work. And the more you dig into that statement, really what that statement is as soon as you get rid of the bullshit, the facade, the things that we put up around us to protect ourselves or whatever, as soon as you get rid of that, you can actually have a real productive kind of boundary breaking movement and conversation.
Most people never get to that.
Most people never get to that, which is, again, one of the things that we try and cultivate at FLOWBIO is be vulnerable, right? I'm very transparent about my vulnerabilities with the team. It's by design. It's because you have to lead by example sometimes in some of the harder things, which society doesn't teach us, right? Society doesn't reward you to be vulnerable. And we've had this. I've had this burn me so many times. I've had it burn me where I was vulnerable with a partner, I was honest with a partner, and they basically completely took advantage of that information. But I'm not going to change what I do as a function of a bad agent, right? You move on. But as a society, I still think we are taught to show steel armor plated reinforcement kind of suits rather than the vulnerable individual who's winging it that we are.
So some of the challenges I think that you will have faced early on is, I know you made a decision quite early to be sort of hardware focused rather than software focused. And it's really interesting that you talk about this at a kind of societal level, because maybe that sort of ethical viewpoint of, not having throwaway things and everything else kind of enforced that decision for you. Because I know a lot of the other sort of sweat detection type companies have non-reusable patches that you buy a pack of them, you throw them in the bin, it creates a bunch of trash and everything else. Was that part of that decision-making process that you wanted to create something reusable?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, to begin with, hardware, I remember when we were at EF, and I was speaking to Alice, the founder, and she was like, you've chosen hardware, sports, and consumer. That's like the holy trinity of shit for VC. Like, why are you doing that to yourself? And, I remember just like thinking to myself and then responding like, well, I'm not here to win a kind of a celebrity contest. Like, I'm here to build something I think needs to exist. And the unfortunate truth with FLOWBIO and sweat data is, without the training data, without the raw information, you cannot build what is the bigger opportunity, which is AHI, Advanced Hydration Intelligence, which is this kind of machine learning algorithm, which we can install onto any wearable today, which uses energy expenditure and skin temperature. You cannot build that without getting the training data. So I think some things in life just can't be done without the hard miles, and that's very much the case for sweat data. The reusable one, actually, that wasn't from a climate perspective, that wasn't the leading decision, because we didn't actually think it was technically possible. We thought we had to be single use, and eventually we'd figure out the reusable. What we saw when we got the single use beta platform out in the wild was people were using it very scarcely, because you have the psychological aspect to it, right? You're having a 5 to 7 pound sensor, which means every workout you do is now a very expensive workout. So you're going to be very resource efficient with that single use sensor. So you might use it once a week, 3 times a month. That defeats the entire purpose.
On your big ride or your race day or whatever
Yep,
it might be.
Exactly. So what we saw was very similar behavior to gels, right? I mean, in the good old days when I started out, you would have maybe gels on race and that's it. You would never train with gels because they're expensive. Now people are downing 3-4 gels in a training ride, right? Because it helps. And we've also gotten the price of gels down. So I think FLOWBIO, when we started to see this behavior, we're like, we need to accelerate figuring out if we can make it reusable. And it was actually, necessity is the mother of invention. It was in that requirement that we actually came up with technology which blew up the market potential for FLOWBIO, 1000x, which is, we had to come up with a energy expenditure based approach to measure sweat rate, because sweat rate and measuring sweat rate was the reason it had to be single use, because you'd fill a channel. Once that channel's full, you have to throw away the sensor. You can't empty the channel because these are like really tiny microfluidic channels. When we moved away from measuring sweat rate mechanically to measuring sweat rate algorithmically, so looking at the heat that the body produces, we not only won in accuracy, we became the most accurate device in the space for this. We also now had an answer to scale, right? Hardware, traditionally speaking, in venture, people don't like it because it doesn't scale well. I mean, it's a bit of a lazy answer because the most valuable company in the world is Apple. It's a fucking hardware company, right? Like, it makes no sense. But still, I understand the whole premise of, and the more I got into venture, what you really are looking at, or you have to understand the motivation system. It's opportunity cost. If I, as a partner, have the opportunity cost of taking on 10x more risk with potentially the same return as all these other software companies, I'm not going to do hardware. And that's typically what you see. But the issue is, ironically, and I kind of think it's like poetic justice for hardware companies, if you're a software only company now and you don't own your data, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Like, you have no defensibility. So it's the companies who own their data that have ultimate defensibility. And when it comes to physiological data, if you own the layer that's acquiring that data, that is now your defensibility. So what used to be actually our Achilles heel in fundraising is now our biggest mode of defensibility. We're an un-AI copyable company because AI can't just conjure its own sweat data. It has to physically get that from somewhere. But yeah, the single-use architecture, that was really I would say, a mother of invention of necessity, because the customer was telling us, this just isn't something I'm going to use every day.
So just so people can understand, because I think what you just said there about the sort of, these AI companies and sort of software only companies have been growing in the fitness space for a long time, and they're going to die out pretty quickly. But just kind of make that a bit more concise for people that might not understand why that's happening and why that's changing so fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's also not as black and white as a lot of people are saying, which I also want to preface. So like the likes of Strava, right? Strava don't own their data, but Strava have an incredible feature set that they built behind that data. So Strava's not going anywhere anytime soon, so to speak. But it's I would say it's companies like personal training apps, right? Where they're using the same methodology as anyone else, because it's openly available methodology. Like especially in endurance sports, right? You have 3 weeks of build, 1 week of rest. That's how all training plans are built. You typically have like 2-3 hard sessions a week, followed by 4 easy sessions or 3 easy sessions, depending on how many days of training you want to do. And that's it. That's the maths. And you could go into Lovable. You can go program a front end app. You can go into GPT. You can create like a conversational experience for the athlete to tell them what their requests are, and boom, you now have a competitive training app. I think that the trick is still, and it will always be, technology is simply an enabler. The trick is always going to be in creating an experience where you have a sticky user and that user base grows. I think that is still where the majority of hardship is going to be. The AI tools that we have available to us lower the threshold of getting started, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem of how do you get a user base to love your product and continuously use your product. So I think now investors are probably going to be even more critical of retention and customer acquisition, because the technical challenge, the technical risk is somewhat gone for the majority of companies, especially in like the consumer kind of facing front end side of things. But if you're an electrolyte business, AI can't create an electrolyte and get it to the shelf on Boots. That's still a physical bricks and mortar, bits and pieces business. So I think a lot of founders starting out now who are looking at what's happening, they're probably going to actually bias to a brick and mortar or bits and pieces business, because that's actually something that's defensible from AI.
What is the so it's kind of stickiness of a customer is really interesting in FLOWBIO's case, right? Like, how are you building for the future, and how are you going to enable those customers to continue a longer term journey? Because, the skeptic could say, they go through a training program, they understand their sweat data once, they build that knowledge, they could then dispose of the wearable, not use it again. But I know your longer term plan is to use that data that you've collected through your hardware to develop an algorithm that you can then license to potentially other wearables companies and deliver that hydration knowledge on a wider scale. So how does that play out for you?
Yeah, so it's 2 pieces. So firstly, because the nature of sweat, it's dynamic. You can't just like use the sensor for 3 months and be like, cool, I've got my data, because 3 months later it's now summer, and your data now completely changes because the environmental conditions change, and also your training plan probably changes. So really, for FLOWBIO, the mentality isn't, and again, it's that fear versus love. Like, we're not worried about losing customer. We want to make the best experience possible that keeps them engaged. So we're looking at kind of value add features in terms of, okay, if you think of an individual who leads an active lifestyle, they're always in one of 3 states, right? They're either performing, they're either recovering, or they're preparing. So right now, I did my session, I'm in recovery mode. So that's why I'm drinking a lot of water. I'm about to have a massive lunch, which I use an app called Hexus to get my macronutrients right. So my head is always in one of those 3 states. So from a hydration perspective, it's the exact same thing. We want to make sure that you, as an individual, as a customer, don't have to think about this. Our life is already busy enough. We want to prescribe you and basically give it to you on like a Post-it note of what you need to do. And that requires a lot of advanced kind of physiological algorithms. So that's why you pay us the big bucks, is because we remove all of the thought work. We remove the guesswork entirely. So our motivation and our strategy of retaining customers is just by being really user-centric when it comes to our design and when it comes to our functionality, and really studying the user, which is not hard for us to do because the majority of us in the company are active lifestyle individuals. But that I think for me is the main thing. And then yes, you touched on it, right? AHI is a huge unlock, I think, for the business, and also just for us as people, because AHI allows us to install our technology without any hardware onto any wearable today that's being shipped, and provide people with hydration data. And I think it's the really interesting thing that I am like really looking forward to is, when people say, what does success look like for FLOWBIO? And my answer for success is somewhat of a boring one. When hydration is like a given, when it's as unsexy as sleep tracking or calories or step counts, when it's just like, it's part of the paperwork, because that means that we're everywhere. That means that we're completely wall-to-wall deployed, and people aren't thinking we're exciting anymore, because it's just a given that how much you need to drink and how much salt you need to take.
The kind of way you get to with carb loading now and gels is where you want to be. It's just something that you do.
It's just something you do. It's not special anymore. You're not outstanding as a person by doing it because everyone's doing it. And it's interesting when people ask us, like, what's the market size for FlowBio? And I'm like, well, the market size is, why would you guess what you need to drink and have headaches and cramping and poor sleep? Why would you do that to yourself when you could just know exactly what you need to drink? That's the market size.
Especially for the average, like we're talking a lot about athletes and amateur athletes, but for the everyday person, right, you've got people that are optimizing all of these things. And even for those people, if they're not getting their hydration right, like a lot of it is irrelevant and pointless.
Exactly. And I think so if we think about the world on a single spectrum. So we have kind of the single spectrum, which is a motivational spectrum, right? It's kind of the on the right-hand side, it's the people who are really driven by performance and accuracy, right? So that's kind of the likes of myself and all of our customers. But on the left, as you kind of go down that spectrum, it's convenience. That's the really important thing. They want to live a healthy life, but it needs to be convenient, right? They're not yet in that phase of life where they have the energy or the understanding to really go out and research all the different methods. They just want it to be given easy. That's why the Apple Watch is the #1 health and fitness tracker, right? Because it's a convenient form factor which wraps in their texts, their phone calls, all that stuff. That is why the Apple Watch will continue to outsell the Oura Ring and Whoop Strap, because it's the most convenient means by getting health data. That said, I don't wear an Apple Watch, even though it's the best performing wearable. I wear a dated heart rate strap because it's the most accurate. Both products deserve to exist. And I think what a lot of people get wrong is they focus on the product which has infinite scale and say that's the only thing you should do. But what you then do is you open up, in our category, you open up, a massive blind side, because there's this huge population of people who would spend significantly more amounts of money than the folks who buy an Apple Watch on their performance devices. I still argue that the lifetime value of a Garmin customer is significantly better than the lifetime value of a Apple Watch runner. The reason being, a Garmin customer buys their Garmin Fenix watch maybe 3-4 times a year. They're buying, their Garmin power meter pedals if they're a triathlete. They're buying their Garmin Turbo Trainer. They're buying their Garmin heart rate strap, like you name it. And that is still a very lucrative market, but it's also the market which is required because that's where the training data comes from. So we want to cater to both, but yeah, inevitably, the folks that you were just talking about on that spectrum, convenience is significantly more important to them, and that's where they'll get it through AHI. But that doesn't mean it's less valuable to them in that sense.
We can't really finish this conversation without talking about investors, because I know it is something that you're very passionate about. I'd love to know how your kind of your outlook on the world has sort of informed your investor journey, because there's an inflection point with most founders where their kind of philosophy goes out the window. To put not too fine a point on it, maybe that's a bit exaggerated and unfair.
Yeah, your values get parked
because the cash needs to be collected, right? Like how has that impacted your investment journey?
Yeah, I mean, again, just looking at stories. So we had, I think it was our 3rd round, where we had a very, very relevant fund come to us. I mean, the GPs behind the fund were some of the who's who in the industry for us. So like, if we had their names behind us, a lot of doors were open. But they took advantage of the situation. They gave us a term sheet that was well below what we negotiated, and they expected us to take it because we were at that point, I think, 2 months away from kind of no cash, and we turned it down. And they were surprised, and I was like, well, this is a long-term relationship. If this is how you're starting the relationship, it's very indicative of how the relationship is just going to be. And again, it wasn't an easy thing to do because you're staring down the barrel of a gun. But I think the thing that I've learned a couple of things when it comes to specifically like the professional investment space. I think one thing is I was massively disillusioned behind the motivations of what a lot of people get into VC for, right? I grew up in Silicon Valley where VC was somewhat invented. And the reason VC was invented was because of the deep tech technologies that weren't getting funding from conventional sources, right? These were people who were incredibly passionate about bringing really, really impressive but hard to do technology to market. Obviously, they were in it for the money, but still there was that nerdy passion for getting something fundamentally cool to the world. I think a lot of VC has lost that nerdy passion. And I think what has resulted in that, and you kind of see that in the companies that get born, is it's a lot of uninnovative, but more kind of proven, more guaranteed successful ventures. what I'm actually really am surprised by is for someone who's doing this job professionally, for a lot of people that I've met, they're still using their own experiences as like reasons for not investing. So we've had countless of conversations where, like, you typically get one of three: the market's not big enough, the technology is not ready enough, or I'd like to see more traction, whatever. But when you get the market's not ready enough, initially I would take it because I didn't know any better. But now I challenge that and say, okay, based on what research? Like, how do you know that the market's not big? You're looking for blue ocean opportunity. The data doesn't exist. When the smartphone industry was a nascent industry, so I was at Intel for a period. Intel did not invest in the smartphone industry because they didn't think it would be a scalable or a huge industry. Because why would people, want a small screen like that? Surely they just want to do their work on a big computer. We don't know what we don't know. And I think what I'm really impressed by or shocked by is the lack of curiosity, for the most part, in professional investing. And I kind of shifted my mindset probably 2 years ago from I really need their money to actually the power dynamics are completely flipped here. Whereas, yes, there's cash that they represent, but they are a supply side. They need to supply. If they don't supply, they don't exist. So the demand side is actually really, really important. And it's a relationship. So what you don't want to have is just take the supply and then deal with the consequences. You need to be very tactical about who you work with. From my perspective, that mindset shifted from like, I need to convert you, this conversation needs to go well, to I'm going to work this conversation as much as you're working me. I'm going to work you. And I'm really going to test to see, are you in that 5% of outliers? In the same way investors are looking for the 5% of outliers, founders should be doing the same. Because I think, unfortunately, for the majority of VC, you look at the asset class as a whole, it's an underperforming asset class. We can make way more money, you and me, by putting our money on the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ. And we can just put it in an index tracker and be done with it, right? The IRR of most venture funds is not impressive. So I think it's we as founders are equally responsible for testing the venture capitalists in front of us as they are for testing us. The irony is our tests are significantly more rooted in fundamentals because they don't really know the questions to ask us. And a lot of them lack the curiosity to find out what questions they should ask us. So yeah, I'd say that's been my biggest fascination of like professional investing for the most part isn't very professional. And I think that's a massive opportunity for those in venture who really do have an expertise that they represent, because I think this generalist opportunistic investing is quite outdated. You're probably not going to get in on the good deals anymore, especially with a lot of deeply technical propositions coming to play now. You need to really know what questions to ask. So I think more vertical specific investment is going to be a thing. That's what we're starting to see happen more and more.
I think so, because those people have got the kind of the knowledge experience and they know what questions to ask.
Yeah, I mean, like I've spoken to a lot of family offices who are pulling away mandates for funds and just doing direct investment. Because why would I pay essentially a management fee for people to have an unoccupied office in Soho and a team who's not capable of asking the right questions when I can just install my own team? I'm really passionate about health. I'm really passionate about insurance. I'm going to install my own team with experts and we're going to direct invest. I think venture capital as finance kind of had to show over like the last 30, 40 years, they had to become more hardened and more professional. I think the kind of the glory days of somewhat getting away with just winging it is slowly coming to an end. Because again, the asset class as a whole just hasn't been showing the performance. So people are just looking at it more strictly.
I agree. So for our final section, we've got a few rapid fire questions and have 3 closing questions. So first rapid fire question, a metric you trust more than anything else?
Oof, metric, that's a very good question. Resting heart rate.
I would have thought you'd say hydration.
Yeah, resting heart rate. I think for me, I have noticed correlations between resting heart rate and like stress, resting heart rate and fitness. So resting heart rate for me is something which I can use to quite a high level of certainty in terms of like understanding if I'm doing the right amount of intensity versus if I'm not.
Best money you've spent on your own performance?
A coach.
Coffee, salt, or sleep?
I can only choose one.
Yeah.
Sleep.
One founder you'd love to have dinner with?
Oof. Well, okay, not necessarily a founder. Well, I guess he's a founder now, Johnny Ive.
Yeah, great shout. Marathon, Ironman, or High Rocks?
I enjoyed training for the Ironman the most.
Yeah.
So probably Ironman.
Okay. And then our final 3 questions. Who's had the biggest impact on you as a founder? And it can't be your family or partner.
That's a very good question. I think it was my first investor, a guy called Sal Matisse, in my 3rd company. Yeah, Sal.
Okay, great. One habit or belief around your own kind of rest, recovery, health that you live by amongst anything else?
Yes. I'd say not feeling guilty for taking rest.
Oh, I love that.
Rest,
I love that.
Rest is actually work.
I love that. And the final question, and this is actually quite interesting because this also came up in my research, is something that you ask. I think you, at the end of every interview, you ask who else somebody should meet. So I'm going to ask you, who else do you think that I should interview?
That's, definitely it would be, I think Petri Latala from Ura.
Great.
Yeah, I think he'd have some wonderful stories to tell.
Well, that would be a great intro. Huh?
I will make the intro.
And people can find you flowbio.com.
Yep. Yeah, flowbio.com. I'm not on Instagram. We are on Instagram. The company's Sweat is Data. The easiest way to connect is probably like LinkedIn or WhatsApp, which I'm sure we can put those details.
We probably won't put your phone number in here, but emails.
Let's do email and LinkedIn, because otherwise I'm going to get spam called.
Yeah, amazing. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you for having me, Jamie.
Thank you.